We are influenced by previous generations. We're influenced by the nonverbal behaviors of people around us. We don't even have to hear their thoughts. We're picking them up anyway. That energetic line is there already. And so how do we change that?
I'm excited to have this conversation. And I'll tell you what, I've had a lot of conversations about leadership. And leadership is a topic that I feel like you can only talk so much about, right? There's only so many ways to talk about how to be a good leader. I think most people who have accomplished that feat of being a good leader, there's not that many skills involved so much as removing some of the junk that a lot of people try and carry, the ego and the pride and the humility. I feel like you need to get down to the core of who you are. And from what I've read of your work, I believe we're pretty aligned in that, right? There's a lot of humility aspect and kind of uncovering the leader within, not really creating a leader so much, right? Would you say that's kind of on the same path?
Yeah, I like that you said that. Are we on? Like, have we?
Yeah, we're good. We're rolling.
Awesome. Thank you. I just got off my own podcast radio show. Well, it's not in Apple or anything, but we were talking about leadership with the guest I had, and I love that you said that it's more about removing than it is about adding. I think there's things that we can add, like in the sense of that we're human, and as humans we have an innate desire to grow. Life is about growth, right? And so I think there's things that we can always perhaps improve upon. But I love what you said about a lot of it is letting go of things. Like, one of the things we say in the book that I co-authored, 21 Conversation Secrets for Tomorrow's Leaders. It's actually called Conversation Secrets. And we talk about various things that might seem obvious in retrospect, but people forget to use them, or they're not doing them in their leadership. Some really core fundamental things. And one of them that struck me as you were talking is like, if we can let go of our ego and our addiction to being right, for example, that is a biggie. Because when we're addicted to being right, we're usually trying to make other people wrong. And that can really get in the way of leading others. I mean, look, I often say people want, like when I talk about negotiation, for example, is one of the power skills in leadership is being able to negotiate, being able to influence others. And many people think that it's about convincing someone to do what you want them to do. Well, how many of us like being convinced by someone else's stuff, right? But we're more influenced or want to follow somebody who allows us to feel good about ourselves, who helps to bring out the best in ourselves. And, it also starts with our own self-leadership in terms of bringing out the best in ourselves as well. So, I think we likely are aligned. I was looking at some of your earlier episodes and thinking, I like these topics. This is really great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's actually leadership and seduction are not two topics which normally go well together, but, I want to relate it because there's a quote that I heard, which I'm probably not going to repeat precisely, but seduction is the art of getting you to do something you already wanted to do. And a lot of people don't think about it that way, but we have these innate desires to do, again, whether it's a relationship or whether it's, what you do at work. All of us have these unique desires to be able to go out in the world and do a thing. Mm-hmm. Leadership, I believe, is really the ability to cull that from a person and help them identify what desires are, right? And I think that the best leaders are people who understand that about themselves. It's not something that they are building; it's something they're revealing within themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's a really, like you said, to remove this stuff to get to be the authentic version of themselves, and show up, because that allows them to also see other people for who they are.
That's right.
And not just see them as a cog in the machine, but see them as their authentic self. And a lot of times, do you think that when a leader is dealing with someone on their team, they have to realize that that person may not even understand who they are themselves?
Oh, yes, for sure. When you're talking about, in order to be authentic, we have to know if we're wearing a mask. We have to know, have we have we put on a mask in certain situations? And, I know that I remember I was asked this question. We were floating it around in a group that I was in around what masks do you wear at work? And how are you different at work than you are at home? And most people, I think, can resonate that they might do things differently or might even appear to be someone different at work because they're trying. Look, we've got this human desire to belong. You talked about human desires, right? So we all have a shared human, fundamental, psychological human desire to belong somewhere, to someone, to an organization, to within a group. Our the key fears around rejection are about being rejected from the tribe, from the group. And so if each of us has this desire to belong, then often we'll do things to fit in. And we might do things to fit in that aren't actually aligned with who we truly are. You can often see, I know this in myself. My husband and I get dressed in the morning and we look at each other because we have to check whether we're wearing the same colored clothes. Because subconsciously, he might see what I have hanging up on my closet that I've already pegged. And subconsciously, he'll wear the same color. And we'll go, oh, well, we've just picked it up, right? We've picked it up from each other. And you see this when you see people walking down the street and they are dressed alike because we have that subconscious, it's not even conscious sometimes, desire to show that we belong. And so the masks that we might wear that might not even be ours are so powerful because when we're wearing a mask, it can influence our own behavior. We might actually do things that are different than we might otherwise do. I don't know if you're familiar with Milgram's experiment from the 60s. It was a horrible result. But he was able to show that people will do things based on authority or being told that it's come from someone wearing a lab coat, and they did heinous things. This was post World War II, and they were actually trying to show certain things. That's an egregious example of it, but it does sort of show that if we're not conscious of what of the influences around us, we might actually be wearing a mask or we might be doing things that aren't authentic to ourselves. And so it really requires leaders especially to know that about themselves, to know themselves so well that they can know if am I showing up authentically? Because there's a real desire, especially now, we're seeing more and more desire from team members to be in an organization working for a leader who is authentic. And, so in order to draw it out of someone else, we have to know that about ourselves. So I've got a little in a few different directions there, but I'll stop there because I think that this is such a key topic around being able to know that about oneself in order to bring it out in others.
It is. And, I definitely agree with all that. And I think the thing that highlights to me is the need for leaders to have people to hold them accountable and to help them sharpen their own sword.
Yes.
Because it's definitely one of the struggles that I see with a lot of people is they get into a leadership role and all of a sudden they have no one else above them to say, hey, here's an area where you're lacking, you need to improve on. Now you either need to really be honest with yourself and audit yourself or get your team to tell you, which is really difficult for people to do.
Yeah.
Really beneficial, but really difficult to do. Or you have someone in your tribe to hold you accountable to it. Where do you see the best growth opportunity for someone who's in a leadership position who may not have that insight into themselves? Is it finding a tribe? Is it getting a coach or a mentor? Like, what is the best step for someone to really grow as a leader?
Wow, this is such a great question. And I'm glad you asked it because I think that many people find themselves in leadership positions because they're really good at what they do. And so they have the technical expertise and skills and they're performing at a high level. And so we often make the assumption, then we'll put them in that high level leadership position, but we haven't given them any skills or resources or support or help them build the foundation that they can lead others to do the same or something similar or better, right? That's what we're hoping they're going to do when we put them in positions like this. But it's kind of like putting them out there and saying, okay, you now go lead the charge, and they have no idea how to lead others. right? And this happens in all kinds of professions, but especially it happens in the highly technical professions like law, my own profession, my previous profession. It also happens in the tech world a lot, where engineers, scientists, and they're extremely good and focused at what they do, but they haven't necessarily. We don't learn this in school, how to lead others, right? Because it's its own thing somewhere else. So back to your question. So how do we set someone up for success? You gave a few different examples of what some of those key things that we can do, and I would say it's all of those. It's not just one. So if someone were to hire me as their coach, for example, I'd say, what other resources do you have? Do you have peers that you can go to and share the struggles or the challenges that you're facing, and find out how they're dealing with it? Because I can't see behind my hands. My peripheral vision only extends so far, and that's true for every one of us. We have blind spots. And there's an old, it's from the 70s, I think, called the Johari window. And it's like there's 4 windows. There's the known, what we know about ourselves, what we can see. There's what others see about us. And then there's what others see about us that we don't know. And that's the window that is it's the riskiest to us because we can't see it. Others can see it. And then there's another window that others can't see and we can't see. So both those windows are super important. The point is we can't see them ourselves. And so we need others to help us see them. And we also need to feel open about having those conversations. So not being subject to criticism or bullying or penalties for not knowing or not having, but really being acknowledged that we're coping with, we're leaning into. And so I would say having a peer group, in your point about having a leader, so someone above them who can help them see that this is the road, this is the pathway. Maybe I've been there myself, and I can help you leverage this as you're going through what I went through, that kind of mentorship. And so really, I think all of those things, and it has to also be within the person to be willing to be open to receive that. And that can take some work for some people because they've never been in a position where they felt safe or able to accept that kind of feedback. And then the structures and systems in place to allow that feedback to be and how to deal with it, rather than just leaving the person to figure it out for themselves. Those various support structures, I think, are super important.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you talk about the desire to see what we can't see is the most important one, but it's also the one that we avoid the most.
Of course.
Right. And it seems counterintuitive. You would think, hey, this is the biggest area for growth. This is the biggest opportunity you have. These are the things that could be improved on, changed. This is the area for growth. But most people will actively avoid that because, hey, if I don't know about it, I don't have to know about it. Right? Because it feels like if I don't know about it, it doesn't exist. And it almost feels childish, like you're sitting there with your hands over your ears because don't tell me, otherwise I have to know. Where do you start changing that behavior? Is it accepting yourself for who you are, the good and the bad? Is it not caring about other people's opinions? Like, what is the lever to flip for a person to get them comfortable with the uncomfortable?
I think it's going to be different inroads for different people. And for some, it's going to start with an intellectual understanding or seeing that the road ahead has forked in 2 directions, let's say, and deciding to take the one that's a little bit more challenging. I would say just on that challenge and uncomfortable part of it, that the key thing, and I think this is said over and over again in the research and literature on human behavioral change, is that you take it one step at a time. And the smallest bit can be, like the smallest step can be the very next step to take, rather than trying to, eat the proverbial elephant all in one go. It's like New Year's resolutions are the same things, right? We go through this every year. People make these big, lofty goals, and then they get challenged at the first go. And by January, I think it's like January 27th or February 15th or whatever, that's the date at which 95% of resolutions are dropped, because the person hasn't made any change, or they've tried to do too much all at once. I raise it only because we tried to change everything all at once, and it's too much. It's too much for most of us to take on all at once. So I'd say, like, look at the place where what's one small thing I can do today, and track and see, and having people around you that you can go to, and feel psychologically safe. And I know that's a big term these days. I'm more talking about when our amygdalas, are that reptilian part of our brain that wants to keep us safe, will do anything to keep us out of being uncomfortable. And so we actually have to tell it that it's okay. We actually have to tell it that I'm going to be okay. And that part of moving forward and being successful is failing. You have to test things to fail at them and then learn in order to grow. And by not getting uncomfortable, we're not testing, we're not allowing ourselves to fail. So failure actually has to be okay in order for the learning to happen. And I think a lot of organizations can miss this step in their performance metrics, that it's got to be okay to test, make mistakes, and keep going. In most circumstances, I recognize that there are some places in some professions where it's actually, illegal to make a mistake, or then you do something else, along the way in order to hone that skill, and before, making the call or whatever it is. Like doctors go through, how much training they go through so that they're making fewer mistakes, because they're very costly to life and everything else.
Yeah. It makes me wonder if one of the best advantages you can have is having a real world example of a good, humble, authentic leader in your circle that you can emulate from.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where mentorship can really come into play, is really to be looking for that person. And you can, maybe it's someone in your organization, or through networking, or even reading. I mean, sometimes, Jim, I think I've heard this from others, and I find this myself, is if you can look to a leader that might not be somebody that you're going to be able to have a personal relationship with. Like, it could be like, for me, for example, it might be someone like Oprah, or it might be like Wayne Dyer, for example, if any knows that name. Just the thoughts and the ways that they live their life. There's lots to emulate there, and so it's looking at what are the best of the best. Because we're all human. So even that person that you might put on a pedestal and see, oh, that's who I want to be, they're human too, and they will fail. They'll make mistakes. And so
Right.
that it's watching them and watching what they're learning from that. That's one of the best places to get lessons to learn from without having to do it yourself at that point. But it's learning that iterative process from how others are managing in the, as you say, in the world that you're in. Maybe it's the industry or the organization.
Yeah. I think that there's a struggle point here for people who look for a very close, good example of a leader in the real world, like in their zip code, let's say, right? Because there are not that many great examples of leaders currently in the world. And I know that's a kind of a dire thing to say, but in this current environment, we don't have a lot of exceptional leaders who live public enough lives that we can call on and say, oh yeah, there's 30 of them that I can name off the top of my head. I could probably name 3, and the list is getting smaller every day, because unfortunately, a lot of the people who we glorify don't necessarily lead with morals and integrity. And, you don't want to emulate everything. They may be great in an area, one specific area. They might be great in hiring practices, or they might be great in scalability, but they don't have the entire full package. And because of that, we tend to just either disqualify all of them or find one and then we emulate the bad stuff too, right? So it gets very challenging to say, hey, this is an example of a leader I want to follow 100%, and people give up.
And maybe that's okay. maybe that's okay. And maybe, Jim, that's the place that we have to be okay with not finding the 100% perfect person. It's like you talked about seduction earlier, like looking for the 100% perfect mate or partner can be a setup for failure, because everyone is human, though all those leaders are human, and they're going to be, I would hope they would excel in a particular area. Like I was using an example of Olympic athletes on my show earlier, because it's such a great analogy to look at somebody at a high performance level. Well, unless you're a decathlete, and even if you are a decathlete, you're still specialized in a few areas, but there's going to be all these other things that go on at the Olympics that have nothing to do with what you're doing. And you will be crap at those things, but you'll be great, exceptional at this one thing or this handful of things. And so if you've got different areas that you want to excel in your leadership, look to a few and look at how they are each responding to these different challenges in different ways, and then take the best and leave the rest.
Yes.
Take the best.
It's
and
interesting
leave the rest.
That you brought up that example, for an athlete who does a decathlon. They're not going to typically, they're not going to be the one who ranks number one in an individual sport on all 10. Right. They might have one or two where they're like in the top 3, but they are pretty much a solid 4 in all 10, and that's how they become number one. It might not make sense mathematically, but logistically, absolutely. It just works. And I think that's a great point to look at. Hey, who are these people who are going to exemplify solid skills across the board? And, I think there's another area that we might look at here. Culturally, currently, we have a very hard time with categorizing people as good or bad, and there is no in between.
Yeah.
Right. So without diving into the politics of it necessarily, but just as a surface level.
Yeah.
Right now, people want to say this person's good, this person's bad, and you cannot learn from that at all, right? You have to be able to say, I might disagree with this person as a whole. However, can I learn something from this one specific thing?
Yeah.
And I think that's what leaders and people who are able to excel can do very well, is they can say, hey, I might not want to be this person. I might not be a fan of theirs. However, in this one area, they're exceptional. So let me learn from this specific thing, right? And not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Do you see the same trend happening where people really generalize too much?
Oh, 100%. And here's the thing. I think this is part of human nature, that we live in a binary world. And I mean by that black and white. Binary is when you have a choice between two things like black or white, and night and day, right? We've got morning, we've got evening, we've got daylight, we've got midnight. So we have a lot of things in our world that are set up with a yes or a no choice, or this or that. And as human beings, our brains are wired to categorize, because we're trying to make sense of the 100 bazillion numbers of things that we're taking in through our senses. Our visual sense, for those of us who have visual acuity, our eyes are taking in so many things, and our brains are trying to make sense of all that. And so, of course, we're going to see things in a more narrow way, in order for us to make sense of what we're seeing. And so we toss the rest, or we don't see it, but on some level we're aware of it. Now, get back to your question. So it's normal for us to categorize this or that. So, however, as evolved, I hope, human beings, we also have a choice to think about, okay, so if I feel strongly on this side and not on that side, let me explore that. As human beings, it's common for most of us to not be comfortable in the gray. There are some of us, myself included, who can see, just how I'm wired. I can see the gray, and I will often look at the gray. I want to find the gray, because there's such a polarity
Right.
And so when we're talking, we're not going to talk politics, but when we have a choice between a dual system, that means it sets it up as a, you choose
Right.
one or the other. I love what you're saying about exploring what it is you like about both sides. And if you're willing to sit with it, I'm not saying you specifically, anybody out there listening,
Right.
is you want to be willing to sit with and explore what is it that I don't like, and what areas might I be willing to go in which direction. We tend to get down, and again, coming back to the belonging thing, if we're in a zip code or a postal code in my country, in Canada, or we're in a neighborhood or a family where there's a tendency to go in a particular direction, say that this is the right way to go, we tend to go that way. It's harder for us to separate from it because, again, the whole belonging thing. And it's healthy to explore and think, how do I want to? What's my authentic self telling me? What is important to my value system, and what will I do? And having the conversations. I mean, that's where things get more challenging, and it comes back to leadership skills again. When we're in the leadership environment, is conversation skills and willingness, bravery to be a little uncomfortable, because it's often the harder conversations that have the most leverage for change, and growth and satisfaction, as a human being and as a leader or in amongst your team.
Yeah. It makes me too think about, there's a practice I do typically once a week, which was recommended to me by a friend that I would recommend to anybody else, is if you're someone who listens to podcasts or news or any sort of talking head media, actively, at least one day a week, listen to a viewpoint you disagree with, right? So, usually such and such a show will have a certain slant to it. And unfortunately, every person who speaks has some perspective. Mm-hmm. We're not going to avoid it. Everyone's got their own perspective on how they view things. But how it was explained to me was, hey, if you spend all of your time listening to people you already agree with, you don't grow.
That's what you'll get.
Right. But if you spend at least some dedicated amount of time listening to things that you don't naturally agree with, that's when you can either get a different viewpoint, learn something, or really fine tune yours and say, hey, this really, doesn't jive with who I am authentically. I strongly disagree, but it helps test that opinion, right? Rather than just living in an echo chamber, you really want to intentionally put yourself in a position that you disagree with people, not in a vicious way, but you get in these scenarios where you can kind of test your theories and learn a little bit. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and it's really about how, if you want to change, if you actually do want to help change someone's mind or behavior, whether you're in a leadership position or you're in a challenging conversation like our current environment, is understanding. It's all about understanding the other person, understanding the other person's point of view, and how can we do that if we don't listen to their point of view, if we don't ask their point of view? And these, by the way, these are all brilliant things that go into negotiating, into leadership, all of this, but it also goes into our ability to have relationships with people and to understand the world is to really be being willing. And to take another step further is, if you're willing to be influenced, doesn't mean you will be. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. But if you're willing to listen and willing to be influenced, you might actually change your mind about something.
Yes.
Or change how you see something. Agree. And again, that comes into leadership. It comes into everywhere. And I think I think we butt up against that risk. And I keep coming back to it, but because I think it's so powerful. That risk of not belonging is so powerful that it really challenges a lot of us to step into that discomfort zone, even for a moment, to test those waters.
Yeah, I strongly agree, and I think, like you said, the willingness to really sit in a conversation that you might instinctively disagree with, or sit in a conversation and be proved wrong. Sounds almost wild to say, but most people aren't, because they're so afraid of being wrong, because that will somehow shake the foundation of their identity, right? Because so many people build their identity on, such shallow ground that if all of a sudden someone challenges it, I don't know who I am anymore.
Right.
I've attached my identity to this point, or being right on this thing, that now I can't even be willing to accept a different point of view, because I don't even know who I am after that. If I'm wrong about that and throw me out, I'm useless. Right. But I love how you talk about kind of being willing to learn, unlearn, and relearn different things. That's the only way that we can grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. One of the things that has informed a lot for me is, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. David Hawkins. He looked at human consciousness and in vibrations, like vibrational energy that we feel in consciousness. So he talks about the varying levels of energy, and that negative, well, let's call them so-called negative emotions like anger, guilt, shame, they vibrate at very low levels, like around 200, 20. Below 200 tend to be the sort of negative emotions that might guide some of the things that we're doing. And then around 200 and above are the higher vibrational energies. And so what I find really powerful is to be thinking about, especially for leaders, to always be trying to come from above that 200 level, because the higher level energies can entrain the lower level energies. Sorry, that was alliteration hard to get out of my mouth. Can entrain those lower level energies to come higher. And that's where we are in the world right now overall, whether it's in organizations or just overall. And so my message right now to myself and to my clients and anyone I'm talking to, so I'm talking to you, Jim, is that let's focus on bringing our energy up and leading from higher level places so that we can bring others along with our energy. So those energy patterns that are those some mostly palpable. We can feel when we walk into a room how the energy shifts and changes. That's what I'm talking about. We know when we're in the presence of someone who comes from a high energy. Like if you've ever been in the presence of the Dalai Lama, for example, and I had the blessing, if you like, or I was blessed to be able to be in his presence about a decade ago when he was here at the University of British Columbia, you can feel his energy. Like that's what I'm talking about. I mean, we don't all have to be the Dalai Lama. I mean, he's way up here beyond, right. But there's lots of room from there up, right? To come and show up with that higher level energy.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing about being willing to listen to other people, but also listen to yourself.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, they dismiss that feeling because they can't understand how do you process the difference between something you know in your head and something you know in your gut, right? Because to me, things that you feel in your gut, right? It's a gut feeling.
Yeah.
Those are things that you know in your head. You just don't have the connection to verbalize the thought, right? So it's not necessarily this different, not good enough thought process because it came from your gut and not your head. But it's still something that you need to be able to listen to yourself and trust your intuition to be able to understand how to actually operate.
Yeah.
And, I would encourage people to listen to themselves way more.
I 100% agree, Jim. And it's so fascinating that you mentioned this, because I think that gut or intuition, listen to it, because if you stop listening to it, it will go silent. And it won't help you, but it's there for a reason. And it's the connection of, our thoughts. We think we're our thoughts, but we aren't. Our thoughts are these fleeting things that come into our awareness, and they may or may not be ours. We have thoughts all the time that we've heard from someone else, or we've been culturally conditioned to have or think about ourselves, or we've even inherited. Now they're talking about, they can show that there's generational thinking patterns and beliefs that are handed down through family lines and so on. And we can take them on, or we don't have to take them on. And or in between. And so I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think it's super important to listen to. Because what your gut is telling you is your body's telling you this feels good or this does not feel good.
Yeah. There's an experiment that was run. I have no idea who it was run by, when it was run, but I remember the concept of it. So this experiment that they ran, they put 8 or so monkeys in a room with a ladder, and at the top of the ladder, they put bananas. Okay, and when the first monkey ran up the ladder to grab the bananas, they sprayed the monkey with a hose. The monkey ran down, all nervous, and the next time a different monkey came up, ran up the ladder, they sprayed the monkey with a hose. And then what they did was they started to replace monkeys from the room. So they took one monkey out, put a brand new fresh monkey in, and that monkey now saw bananas. The monkey ran up the ladder, and the other monkeys who had already been sprayed by the water grabbed the monkey, the new one, the fresh one, and pulled him back down to sort of prevent them from getting sprayed by water. Right? Because the other monkeys had already been trained. Right. Hey, if I climb up there, I'm going to get something I don't like. So one by one, they replace these monkeys. Right. They take out the ones who had actually been sprayed and put them in with new fresh ones. And now they get to this point where they've got 8 monkeys who have never seen a drop of water, but all of them are afraid to go up the ladder and get the banana. Right. And this is that thought process, like you said, that we inherit from prior generations. Yes. We have to be cognizant of this in our thinking and be willing to be wrong. Yes. Because if we've been raised to think, hey, if I climb that ladder, I'm going to get sprayed by water, I'm not climbing that ladder. That's right. But how many of us are willing to actually look into our lives and look into the thoughts that we've grown up with, whether it was malicious or just passive? We've been sort of trained for 30, 40, 50 years on how to operate, and we're afraid to be wrong and challenge those ideas. But how much fruit are we missing out on in our lives? Yeah. Yeah. That's a powerful study. I know the study you're talking about. It's a powerful analogy to what we're talking about, Jim. And, I want to come back to something else you talked about earlier, because right now what we're talking about, and we've seen this show up over and over again in various research, that I forget who popularized this term about 20 years ago, but you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And that could be your family, it could be your best friends, it could be a colleague at work. But think about it. If you really think about it, I bet you can find, and this goes for anyone listening, I bet you can see how you are the sum, the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so how do we break out of what you just talked about, right? About how we inherit, like the monkeys, we are influenced by previous generations. We're influenced by the nonverbal behaviors of people around us. We don't even have to hear their thoughts. We're picking them up anyway. That energetic line is there already. And so how do we change that? Well, we find another group. We find someone else to hang around with, even if it's just one person. Or it comes back to what I talked about earlier about you suggested like working with a coach. Yeah. So when I work with clients, that's one of the things I can help them with, see different things. And then also hang around with other peers, like find a mastermind group or an affinity group at work that you can have conversations with, and to be thinking and looking at things in a different way. Find someone who challenges your way of thinking and hang around with them for a while. Even if it's on a podcast, you're still kind of hanging out with them. Ideally, it's much better when we're in person, because that we can actually pick up a lot more when we're in person. Yeah, there's definitely something about in-person energy that just hits different. But it's a great point. And, there's also the expression, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Correct. Yeah.
Right?
No longer challenged.
You should always seek to not be that. And I think that there's a lot of people who have it sort of backwards, right? They want to be the biggest, the best, the loudest, because it pats their ego and it helps them to kind of fill that identity gap that they have. But yeah, to be an effective leader, and you really have to humble yourself and get yourself in a position to learn, because you enjoy the process of learning and serving. Yeah. And I can't think of much better leadership advice than that.
Yeah.
So, all that being said, I just want to honor you for the work that you do, and thank you for spending time with me here. This has been an amazing conversation. I know personally I enjoyed it, and I'm confident that anyone who is looking to grow as a leader will have gotten some out of it as well. So thank you tremendously.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. I love having conversations like this, and I love that we went different places, and it's been a delightful conversation, and thank you for leading it and having me on the show.
My pleasure. How can we best support you?
Lovely. I love that question. Thank you for offering it.
Of course.
I'm looking to expand my audience and reach new people. So I'm always looking to be on other podcasts like your own. So I would love to be supported in helping me find other wonderful conversations to have and places to have these types of conversations. And, I would love it if people are interested, if they like what they hear and they want to know more, they can find me at gallantleader.com and go ahead and reach out. And I'm always looking for ways that I can help. You talked about serving, right? And that's the key part of leadership that we hadn't talked about until you mentioned that, because that's really what leadership is serving. As opposed to we're always gaining something, of course, and that can be all kinds of different things, from financial to emotional to relational, to lots of different intangibles. We are always gaining something, but true leadership is really about serving the greater good.
Yeah, we're gaining as sort of the byproduct of serving, correct, right? Yeah. Not the intention.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite authors has, I think his book is what's his name? I can just barely see it. You're giving before you're gaining, so it's a give to gain kind of principle. But it's not about the gaining. It's about the giving, and that's what
100%.
That's his approach to selling, for example.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really effective because it's real.
Yeah.
Especially when you genuinely show up and you want to help somebody and you want to help, want to serve them.
Yeah.
It's so easy to sell somebody something when you truly believe that what you are offering them will help them. Absolutely. Because by you not selling them, you're actually doing them a disservice.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of people who would benefit from really truly aligning with that rather than just trying to push product. But really, if you genuinely believe the thing you're doing is going to help the other person on the other side of the phone, man, it's such a cheat code.
Yeah. Really good.
But I love that. Thank you very much again. And we'll see you soon. Hey, before you go, can I pray for you real quick? Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for the opportunity to spend time together with the person on the other side of this YouTube video or this podcast or wherever they're listening to this right now. I want to thank you for the opportunity for this day, for this moment right now that we're in, because it was not guaranteed to us. And I want to thank you for putting us in this position to learn and to grow and to humble ourselves so that we can be servant leaders, so we can serve the people around us from heart, from authenticity, from a genuine sense of service, and not for selfish gain, but to continue to pour into the other people around us. And I ask that you continue to show up and to meet the person on the other side of this podcast right now, and give them examples of what it means to be a servant leader, and all the examples that you've given us so far, and there are more examples than we can possibly count, and how to show up and be selfless and serve the people in our community, and those include the people that we might disagree with, and you continue to give us the humility, to remove the ego, to remove the foolish pride. And you continue to allow us opportunities to show up and serve, and continue to glorify you in all the ways that we do that level of service. Father God, I ask these things in your name. Amen. Oh, one more thing. I love you.